Do you still remember Full House, the sitcom that made family feel safe, warm, and almost too perfect to be real? Because behind that laughter, several lives were marked by addiction, prison, scandal, illness, and devastating loss that no episode ever prepared us for. And once you see what really happened to the cast, Full House may never feel like a happy family again. Bob Saget as Danny Tanner. The first face that truly welcomed audiences into Full House was Bob Saget as Danny Tanner. And at just 31, he didn't just play a TV dad, he became one of the most trusted fathers in American television. Danny was the clean freak father of the house, warm, overprotective, endlessly organized, and always trying to hold the family together with hugs, rules, and heartfelt speeches. What made Bob Saget so fascinating is that, off-screen, he was almost the opposite of Danny Tanner. While millions knew him as television's gentlest dad, his real comedic voice was much darker, sharper, and far more adult. Long before and after Full House, he built a parallel identity in stand-up comedy that shocked fans who only knew the wholesome version of him. Professionally, he stayed busy for decades, from America's Funniest Home Videos to touring stages across the country. But the split between America's dad and the man he really was never fully disappeared. His personal life also carried more complexity than the sitcom image suggested. After his first marriage ended in divorce, Saget later found happiness again with Kelly Rizzo, and by the early 2020s, he seemed to have entered a calmer, more fulfilled chapter of life. That is what makes what happened next feel so cruel. On January 9th, 2022, after performing in Florida, he posted online about how energized he felt being back on stage. Just hours later, he was found dead alone in his room at the Ritz-Carlton, Orlando. According to reporting from CNN, ABC News, and statements later cited by his family, he died from accidental blunt head trauma after apparently hitting the back of his head and going to sleep without realizing the injury was life-threatening. By 2026, Bob Saget's story remains one of the most painful contradictions in Full House. The man who played television's safest father did not get a safe ending himself, and that may be why his loss still feels so deeply unsettling. John Stamos as Jesse Katsopolis. If Danny Tanner made Full House feel safe, then at just 24 years old, John Stamos brought the cool as Jesse Katsopolis. Jesse was the leather jacket heartthrob of the house, the Elvis-loving uncle with perfect hair, a motorcycle, and just enough swagger to make him impossible to forget. By 2026, John Stamos looks nothing like that fantasy from the outside in. At 62, he's no longer the reckless, untouchable, cool uncle image people froze him in. He's a husband, a father, and still working, acting, touring with the Beach Boys, and speaking more openly than ever about the losses and self-destruction he once tried to outrun. And the turn in his life didn't come from aging. It came from collapse. He has spoken publicly, including in his memoir, If You Would Have Told Me, and in interviews with People and ABC News, about how grief and emptiness kept piling up. The death of his father in 2001, the devastating loss of his mother in 2014, and then the sudden death of Bob Saget in 2022. A blow so severe, Stamos said he dropped to the pavement when he heard the news. But long before that, he was already unraveling. His drinking spiraled after heartbreak, loneliness, and years of performing confidence he no longer felt. In 2015, that private decline became public when he was arrested for DUI in Beverly Hills, the moment the image cracked. He later admitted he had been moving through life like a man who didn't care enough whether he made it out intact. That may be the hardest truth behind John Stamos. The man who looked most alive on Full House spent years quietly drifting toward the edge. Lori Loughlin as Rebecca Donaldson Katsopolis. When Full House needed more than just warmth, it needed control. At 24, Lori Loughlin stepped into Full House as Rebecca Donaldson Katsopolis and instantly turned the Tanner home into something smoother, sharper, and more complete. Aunt Becky wasn't loud or messy. She was the calm, polished woman who made everything, and everyone feel like they finally had it together. And maybe that is exactly why her real-life collapse hit so hard. In 2026, she is no longer remembered first as the elegant TV wife from Full House, but as one of the most recognizable faces of the college admissions scandal. According to federal prosecutors and later reporting from AP and The Hollywood Reporter, Loughlin and her husband Massimo Giannulli paid $500,000 to falsely present their daughters as athletic recruits to help get them into USC. She ultimately served 2 months in prison, lost work, and watched the kind of reputation built over decades collapse in public. Hallmark cut ties, including her long-running When Calls the Heart role, and in a later interview with The Hollywood Reporter, she admitted she had ignored her own instincts and had to confront the damage head-on. But prison was only part of the fallout. The more painful consequence may have been what the scandal did to her private life. By late 2025, both People and E! Reported that Lori and Giannulli had separated after nearly 28 years, with sources describing a marriage that had never fully recovered from the strain, humiliation, and legal damage they endured together. Around the same period, she was also still carrying the emotional aftershock of losing Bob Saget, someone she publicly described as far more than a co-star when he died in 2022. In 2026, Lori Loughlin is still working her way back into public life, but Becky is gone. What remains is a woman who had everything people are taught to envy, and still managed to lose the one thing television had convinced audiences she would always keep: trust. Jodie Sweetin as Stephanie Tanner. At just 5 years old, Jodie Sweetin walked into Full House as Stephanie Tanner and almost immediately became the child audiences couldn't ignore. Stephanie was the middle daughter with the sharp timing, the fast comebacks, the little girl sass, and that unforgettable habit of turning one line into a catchphrase. She was funny without trying too hard, the kid who could make a family scene feel alive the second she opened her mouth. That's what makes her real life so hard to sit with now. In 2026, Jodie Sweetin is no longer the spunky little sister frozen in reruns. She's 44, a mother, a working actress, a podcast host, and one of the few former child stars from that era who has been brutally honest about how close she came to losing everything. What viewers remember as confidence on screen was followed, off-screen, by years of collapse. After Full House ended in 1995, Sweetin has openly said she drifted into a long cycle of addiction that lasted well over a decade, starting with alcohol in her teens, then escalating into crystal meth, cocaine, and pills in adulthood. And unlike a lot of Hollywood recovery stories, hers wasn't one dramatic rock bottom and a clean comeback. It was uglier than that, and more believable. In her memoir, Unsweetened, and in later interviews with People, Sweetin described using meth heavily by age 18, going through rehab, getting sober, relapsing again after a car accident and prescription medication, then fighting her way back a second time. In 2025, she said publicly that she had been sober from alcohol for 16 years and from medication relapse for 13 years. That may be the real shock behind Stephanie Tanner. The little girl who once made the house feel lighter spent years living in the darkest version of herself, and still found a way out. Mary-Kate Olsen as Michelle Tanner. No one on Full House was turned into a brand faster than Mary-Kate Olsen as Michelle Tanner. She was barely 9 months old when she and Ashley were cast, and by the time most children are learning who they are, America had already decided who Michelle was. The tiny blonde scene stealer with the big eyes, the baby voice, and the catchphrases people never stopped repeating. That may be why Mary-Kate's adult life never unfolded like a normal celebrity story. In 2026, she is 39, almost unrecognizable from the little girl audiences still freeze in memory, intensely private, rarely giving interviews, working in fashion, and living as far from sitcom nostalgia as possible. But that distance came at a cost. In 2004, just after turning 18, she entered treatment for an eating disorder, a crisis that unfolded under brutal public scrutiny rather than protection. Then came 2008, when her name was suddenly dragged into the media chaos surrounding Heath Ledger's death, after reports revealed she was among the first people contacted after he was found unresponsive, a moment that brought invasive headlines and years of ugly speculation she never invited. Her 2020 divorce from Olivier Sarkozy only deepened the image of a woman whose adult life was constantly being examined from the outside, even as she tried to disappear from view. According to People, she and Ashley also chose not to return for Fuller House, preferring a life built around control, privacy, and their fashion empire rather than cameras. That may be the strangest truth about Michelle Tanner. The child who looked most adored may have spent the rest of her life trying to escape being watched. Ashley Olsen as Michelle Tanner. If Mary-Kate often looked like the twin carrying the visible damage, Ashley Olsen always seemed like the one trying to disappear before the damage became permanent. Like her sister, she was only 9 months old when she was cast as Michelle Tanner on Full House, growing up inside one of the most recognizable child star machines of the 1990s. Michelle was cute, quotable, impossible to market just once. And for years, Ashley and Mary-Kate were less like ordinary children than a billion-dollar brand America never stopped consuming. What makes Ashley more unsettling in hindsight is how early she seemed to understand the cost. By 2026, she is 39, almost completely detached from the world that made her famous, rarely photographed on purpose, absent from acting, and deeply committed to the private fashion empire she built with Mary-Kate. But that retreat did not come out of nowhere. Over the years, both sisters have spoken about how unnatural that childhood really was, with Mary-Kate once comparing their upbringing to being little monkey performers. Ashley often appeared to carry the quieter side of that burden, the one who kept composure while the tabloids circled, while paparazzi tracked their every move, and while public obsession with their bodies, adulthood, and private lives became grotesquely normalized. She ultimately stepped away from acting completely, later saying she no longer felt comfortable being in front of the camera and no longer wanted to live that exposed kind of life. According to People, she and Mary-Kate chose not to return for Fuller House, protecting the one thing they never really had as children: control. That may be Ashley Olsen's real ending, not a breakdown, not a comeback, but a refusal. Dave Coulier as Joey Gladstone. Joey Gladstone was the man Full House used whenever the room needed oxygen. Dave Coulier was 27 when the show began, and his whole role inside that house was simple: keep things silly, keep things moving, keep people laughing. He did cartoon voices, bad impressions, physical comedy, all the stuff that made Joey feel like the safest kind of adult, the one who never seemed heavy enough to break. Real life hit him much harder than that character ever suggested. Coulier has spoken about struggling with alcohol for years, but the moment that forced change came in 2020, when he suffered a serious drunken fall that made him realize he was no longer just having a few drinks. He was sliding somewhere darker. He later quit drinking, but that wasn't the end of the fight. It was only the beginning of a much crueler stretch. In November 2024, Dave revealed he had been diagnosed with stage 3 non-Hodgkin lymphoma after discovering a lump in his groin about the size of a golf ball. He went through 6 rounds of chemotherapy, and by mid-2025, there was real hope that the worst might finally be behind him. Then came another hit. In December 2025, just months after finishing treatment, he publicly shared that doctors had found a second cancer: squamous cell carcinoma at the base of his tongue. By 2026, Dave Coulier is not just the funny guy from Full House. He is a man who got sober, fought one cancer, and then had to hear the word again before his body had even finished recovering from the first one. That is the kind of chapter nobody can joke their way through. Candace Cameron Bure as DJ Tanner. Candace Cameron Bure was just 11 years old when she stepped into the role of DJ Tanner, the oldest daughter. The good kid, the one who looked stable even when the house around her wasn't. DJ felt familiar. She wasn't flashy like Michelle or wild like Stephanie. She was the girl who looked like she'd probably be okay. The more interesting truth is that her life didn't stay as polished as DJ Tanner made it look. After Full House ended, Candace later revealed she developed bulimia, describing years of binging and purging that had nothing to do with vanity and everything to do with emotional control, loneliness, and losing her footing after childhood fame. She has also spoken publicly about being bullied as a teen while the show was still making her famous. Classmates pulling her hair, mocking her, and writing cruel things on her locker. That damage didn't just disappear when the cameras stopped. And unlike the louder scandals surrounding some of her castmates, Candace's struggles were quieter, which may be why they feel more believable. In later interviews and podcast conversations, she has spoken about depression, anxiety, body image obsession, and the mental strain of trying to stay good in public while privately fighting herself. Reporting from outlets like People and Fox News has also documented how openly she has discussed her eating disorder recovery and the long-term impact of Hollywood beauty pressure. DJ Tanner looked like the girl least likely to break. What makes Candace interesting isn't that she crashed. It's that she learned how to hide the crash so well that most people never saw it happening. By 2026, she is 49, still working, still wealthy, and still very visible. With an estimated net worth around $14 million, built through television, books, producing, and years of Hallmark and Great American Family success. But that polished image now carries a different weight because people know what it took to maintain it. Andrea Barber as Kimmy Gibbler. America laughed every time Kimmy Gibbler showed up. She was the loud one, the weird one, the girl who crashed into scenes like she had no idea how embarrassing she was. Andrea Barber was only 11 years old when she started playing Kimmy on Full House, and she made the character so funny, so shameless, so impossible to ignore that most viewers never stopped to wonder what it might feel like to spend your childhood being remembered as the punchline. That is what makes her story hurt more in 2026. At 49, Andrea Barber lives a life that is far quieter than Kimmy Gibbler ever was. She stays close to her children, works selectively, and co-hosts the How Rude Tanneritos podcast with Jodie Sweetin. Her estimated net worth is around $2 million, enough to look fine from the outside. But some of the hardest parts of her life happened after the laughter ended, when no audience was watching anymore. In her memoir, Full Circle, and later interviews with Today Parents and People, Barber revealed that she battled crippling anxiety for years, but the real collapse came after motherhood and divorce. Following the birth of her second child, she spiraled into severe postpartum depression and anxiety so intense that she later described barely eating, vomiting every day, not sleeping, and eventually sinking to a point where even getting out of bed felt impossible. The image of TV's funniest weirdo had nothing to do with the woman quietly unraveling at home, trying to care for children while her own mind was turning against her. And maybe that is the twist most people never saw coming. Kimmy Gibbler looked impossible to break. Andrea Barber nearly disappeared inside the kind of pain nobody laughs at. Jurnee Smollett, as Denise Fraser. Jurnee Smollett never had the kind of childhood fame that stays cute for long. She was still very young when she appeared on Full House as Denise. Sweet, bright, and easy to overlook if you only remember the main family. But what makes her story land in 2026 is not what happened on the show. It's how much chaos kept finding her long after childhood should have ended. From the outside, Jurnee's adult life looked like one of the few success stories. She kept acting. She built real credibility. She moved from child roles into serious projects like Lovecraft Country, Underground, and Birds of Prey. But while her career kept rising, her private life was quietly turning into something far messier. In 2019, her family was thrown into a national media firestorm when her brother, Jussie Smollett, became the center of the fake hate crime case that dominated headlines for months. Journey stood by him publicly, but later described the experience as deeply painful and humiliating for the family, not just because of the scandal itself, but because it forced private pain into a public arena that never stops feeding on it. Then her own life started breaking open too. In 2020, she filed for divorce from musician Josiah Bell after nearly a decade of marriage. By 2025, court reporting covered an ugly financial dispute over assets and earnings, including money tied to her long acting career. Around the same period, Journey also began speaking more openly about something even darker, saying she had experienced sexual harassment on sets since she was around 12 years old, and describing the early 2020s as a dark space she was still trying to crawl out of. By 2026, she still looks strong on screen, but her story feels very different once you realize how much of her adult life has been spent performing through damage she never asked for. Scott Weinger as Steve Hale. Not every Full House story collapsed in public. Some almost went another way, and that may be what makes Scott Weinger's story so unsettling in its own way. He was just 14 years old when he first appeared as Steve Hale, DJ Tanner's lovable, food-obsessed boyfriend, the sweet, slightly goofy teen crush who felt safe, familiar, and weirdly real. What most viewers never saw was how badly Scott Weinger did not want to become one of those former child stars people only bring up with pity. By the mid-1990s, he had exactly the kind of life Hollywood tells young actors to hold on to: fame, recognition, and a face audiences already knew. But behind that success was a quieter fear, that if he stayed too long, he might never become anything else. So while Full House was still part of the culture, and his career still looked promising, Weinger made the kind of decision people in the industry openly called insane. He walked away and went to Harvard. That was the real turning point. Not scandal, not collapse, but refusal. According to interviews he later gave and profiles revisiting his career, Weinger became determined to build a life that wouldn't depend on whether strangers still remembered Steve Hale. He graduated magna cum laude in English and French literature, later reinvented himself as a writer and producer, and quietly built a second career behind the camera while still returning to the role fans never forgot. In 2026, Scott Weinger is still working, still writing, still occasionally stepping back into the Full House world, but he did something very few former teen stars ever manage. He escaped the sad ending before it had the chance to become his life. Full House was supposed to be a place where everything could be fixed before the credits rolled, but real life didn't follow that script. Some of them survived, some were changed forever, and some never got the ending that family was meant to promise. Which story stayed with you the most? And did this perfect family feel different to you now? Let me know below, and stay with us for more untold lives behind the shows you thought you knew.